The reason why having an emergency fund for me is important is that I feel that if anything derails, I always have a cushion to back me up. I want you to start thinking of how your money can create passive income for yourself. And a high yield savings account is a really great way to do it.
My main advice is start now, start early, or start now.
By leveraging your own business, it's just a smart way to be able to grow your capital without having to do extra work within your business. Welcome back, Successful Stylists, to the Successful Stylist Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ambrosia Carey, where we are going to dive into some strategies to elevate your business, your mindset, and financial freedom. Today's episode, we're going to be focusing on how salon owners and beauty businesses can build successful wealth. And we're going to be talking more about 2025, but this is really just like in general, some really great best practices. And I'm even going to be adding in some notes from a financial planner that we had a couple of years ago, as a matter of fact, just to prove that some of these things are more of a long form game. And it's more about creating financial wealth over time. So I'll be attaching that on as well in a little bit. But in the meantime, we are going to be talking about a sustainable plan to grow your income, reduce debt, and invest in your future. So let's break this down step by step, shall we? First of all, let's talk a little bit about paying off high interest debt first, because as we accumulate debt on credit cards, it's really easy to just get into the cycle of paying off our monthly dues. But that can really accumulate and compound over time. And we will end up being stuck in that debt for much longer than we should be. And oftentimes, with interest rates being up to 25%, the downside of it is that you can get very much stuck in the weeds of having to constantly be paying down. And in time, as it compounds, we end up paying 2.5 times what we purchased that thing for in the first place. So obviously, going after the big high interest rate credit cards first is going to be the number one. The suggested amount is to pay about 15 to 25% of your income that you bring in monthly toward that debt, if you can. I should probably preface this by saying that I am not a financial expert, but I am sharing my knowledge and how I've been able to create financial freedom for myself and even build wealth for my future, to the point that I no longer have to work behind the chair if I don't want to. And now it's just a nice little cherry on top. And this is what I would like for you too in your beauty business. So now let's get into how our money can work for us and be reinvested back in other things. First of all, I think it's important to lay out all of your debts. That could be a car, your house, it could be credit cards, of course, and it could even be a loan that you have to pay back and you just want to be done with that. So there's something called an avalanche method where you can actually pay off the highest debt first. And then that's what we're talking about, the credit cards. And then you can start to roll that into your other debts. And obviously, as that avalanche is down, it gets bigger and bigger, therefore making larger impact toward those debts. And that's the reason why, depending on how you operate and depending on how you save and also your spending habits, one of the two could be better, whether it's a snowball or the avalanche method. The next step is to take a certain percentage of our income always to go toward those things, paying things off, getting rid of our student loans, getting rid of, anything, bank fees, anything that may get in the way of us being able to actually financially grow. Then the next step would be to go into building out your emergency fund. Some financial experts, they say that it's best to accumulate your emergency fund in the process of paying off debt, and others say just focus on the debt first. I think it just depends on how risk averse you are. I personally always like to have a little bit of a nest egg, even if that means I have some debt. I have heard before that some debt is healthy debt. I don't consider credit card debt to be healthy debt. So obviously, if I had a high amount that I needed to pay toward my credit card, and it were important to me to have a higher credit score, let's say, then I would want to make sure that not too much of that debt is being bogged down in my credit cards, therefore lowering my score. Okay, going back into building out your emergency fund. The reason why having an emergency fund for me is important is that I feel that if anything derails, I always have a cushion to back me up, and then I can sleep better at night. I'm less stressed out. I feel more level-headed. I feel more secure. Obviously in the instance like we had a pandemic before, I didn't have to worry about defaulting on any payments and therefore accumulating in time. So I was still able to stay on top of everything month over month. That was peace of mind for me. And that gave me a chance to take more risk in other areas. It just, again, goes back to how risk averse you are. If you don't mind taking risk financially and you don't get as stressed out if you have debt, then it's very possible that paying off the debt first makes more sense for you. But for me personally, I like to have a little bit of a nest egg. So saving while I'm paying things down makes more sense for me. After that, I think it's also important to figure out within this time frame how long it's going to take for you to pay that off and to be fair to yourself. So ideally you want to try to get somewhere in that 6-month time frame so that you can kind of see the very end of the rainbow. You can see that pot of gold. If you go too long of a runway or you don't even set a goal for yourself, then it could be one of those things where that pot of gold just keeps moving and you actually don't ever get to the end of the rainbow, which is kind of a weird analogy because we don't ever actually get to the end of the rainbow in real life. But setting those clear goals is just going to help you get there a little bit faster. Then, of course, you can set aside about 10 to 15% of your monthly income to dedicate toward your savings account. Once you have your nest egg in your savings account, and the typical advice is 3 to 6 months of your monthly spending, you would want to have that saved in your savings account. If you're the type of saver that you are okay with having 3 months of saved up for yourself, then I would say keep that set aside and then take the rest of your money and continue to still be aggressive in your 10 to 15% savings, but put it into a high yield savings account. My advice, and I'll link this below, is I opened up 2 different high yield savings accounts. One is a branch that's literally down the road from me. I can walk there and I can withdraw that money right away if I needed to. The second type of high yield savings account that I opened was digital, which was a little nerve wracking at first, but I will say it has been the easiest and safest way because I can automatically send money from my regular checking account into this account. I do it, I have it on auto pay. I have a couple $100 coming out of my account every single month, automatically goes in there. And then I go on to it. It's called Marcus and it's by Goldman Sachs. I will actually link that below. And if you decide to use it, you actually get an incentive kickback from Marcus, and I get an incentive kickback from Marcus as well. So that is something worthwhile. If you even just wanted to check it out, and let's say you only did it for the 3 months, you just get automatic free money. So what's not to love about that? A high yield savings account, the best way to break it down is that you earn a higher interest rate on the money that sits in that account, and you are rewarded for not touching that money. You can take the money out anytime you want. It is completely liquid. It is not the same as a stock market or index fund. But what I understand, and again, I'm not a financial expert, I could be saying this wrong, and you can come after me if you want, but I think it's more important to get the information out there. And if you want to do the research more on it, I totally invite you to do it. But this is what's worked well for me. As far as a high yield savings account goes, the bank is borrowing your money temporarily, and then they are able to use that for their own investments and make money off of it. So by further incentivizing you to keep the money in there, you get a higher return interest rate for that money. Now, if you wanted to withdraw that money, yes, you can take the money out from the bank, but what the incentive for you to keeping it in there obviously is that that money compounds. Compound simply means that the more the money, the longer the money is sitting in that account, you get paid interest on that growing amount, not the initial money that you put into that account. So it's very important to have compounding because by the time you reach, I think I want to say by the time I reached 30,000 in that account, when it was compounding at that amount, I now was making a couple $100 every single month. And that is not money that I made. So when people talk about making money overnight, sometimes we think of passive income where we had to create something where somebody purchased it. I want you to start thinking of how your money can create passive income for yourself. And a high yield savings account is a really great way to do it, where you're not having to do anything extra. You are literally putting your money in there and you're leaving it alone. The next thing I want you to think about is leveraging your business as an investment. We've talked many times about how we can diversify your income, and that was even in our last episode, as a matter of fact. But I want you to start thinking also in ways that your business can actually bring in income aside from your hands. You know, we've heard before, if you have a brick and mortar, that every single square inch, every single piece of real estate within your business, you want it to be income producing. And what if you had a small corner, for instance, that you could actually lease that space out to an artist or to a jewelry designer or to somebody who doesn't have a brick and mortar? So that's a really great way to bring in extra income without you having to do anything else extra. So instead of that real estate being taken up by a really beautiful display that's not bringing in income, think of it as a way that you can actually generate income. So get clever with that. But by leveraging your own business, it's just a smart way to be able to grow your capital without having to do extra work within your business. And sometimes I think there's not enough conversations about that. And that's just some other way of thinking about you gaining some financial freedom or gaining some financial diversification within this process. The last thing I want to talk about is building a roadmap for your income strategy building. Far too often, we think about ways that we can bring income in. And then we also think about ways that we can save our money. But I think sometimes we don't think of how we can build a strategy around those steps. So if you actually have a roadmap where you're focused very clearly on tracking that progress and knowing where those necessary steps can take you, like for instance, if you were like, first of all, I want to become debt free. And then I want to start saving. And then I want to start investing. And then I want to take those goals and I want to timeline them into monthly, quarterly, and annually. And then I want to take that money and I want to reinvest it into another business, or I want to be an angel investor. So there are lots of ways that you can actually take that money and just continue to compound those things. I know I keep saying the word compound. This episode is brought to you by Gloss Genius, which is the ultimate game changer for salon professionals. It's designed for businesses of all sizes. So Gloss Genius simplifies your workflow with payments, booking, analytics, payroll, and so much more. It really is the all-in-one platform. It has customizable online booking, one-click scheduling, and the lowest payment processing in the entire industry. So it helps you work smarter, not harder, basically. Try it for free. You can get that link in the description and elevate your business. Let's go. I want you to start thinking of it as you're placing your efforts seasonally to these different buckets, and how can you let those buckets pour into the next thing so that you can actually start building another bucket. So this gives you a chance to actually really step into major freedom, but also using your own creativity and how you can let that wealth build more wealth for you. Instead of just saying like, okay, now I'm putting this money in savings and I've got this much savings and I'm watching it grow. Once you get that systematically set up and you have a certain amount going into it every single month, then you can work on growing your income. And then when you grow your income, you want to keep your spending around the same. And then when you have an extra lever of income, then you can put that towards something else where it can be maybe a CD account, or you can put it into an index fund. We didn't even talk about index funds, but I don't feel like I am strong enough to be able to talk about index funds, honestly. And I think there's a lot of people out there that can give great advice. I would probably just start out with a financial institute that you already work with, like Charles Schwab is a really great, starter, somebody that you can lean on from your banking system. You can talk to a financial advisor about it. I will say one of the things I have learned is when you're interviewing somebody for financial advice, ask them what they charge, because everyone does charge, but they all charge a little differently. And if they're charging a percentage, ask them what the percentage is. I think average is 1%, but you typically want to get somebody that charges a little less than that. And if you don't require to meet with them very often, then you can ask them if they will just charge a fee instead of percentage. And that will kind of help you with not having to spend so much money over time for somebody who's managing your account, especially if you are not somebody who's a huge risk taker and you only want to be putting them into index funds. So without further ado, without promise, I am going to be attaching those cliff notes from a previous podcast where we interviewed this really great financial literist who can tell us a little bit more about how you can actually gain financial freedom, and specifically talking about credit scores and how you can actually grow your credit score. So let's take a listen right now.
Jennifer is a certified public accountant and certified fraud examiner. She has over 18 years in the business in finance, accounting, and audit.
First thing you do is define your goals. And when I say goals, it's really your financial goals and where you see yourself. That could be whether it's short term, in the 1 year time period, midterm up to 5 years, and then long term up to 10 years and after that. So kind of the number one step is planning on and setting up an emergency fund. So I think that is an area that should be prioritized as number one. You're going to work on debt next. Once you pay off that highest interest debt, you're going to move that dollar that you've been paying toward the higher interest debt down to your next. And from there, I'd really go from investing for retirement, paying down your lower interest debt would be your next step. And then after that, save for your bigger milestones. I think the main one that people mostly hear about is going to be an IRA. And so that's one of the most common investment plans. There's also a solo 401k, SEP IRA, and a simple IRA. And all have different limits, contributions, and regulations. But I'll tell you a little bit about the IRA because I think it's such a great plan. And honestly, it's one of the easiest plans that you start with. So it's great for beginners or somebody who hasn't invested previously. With the IRA, it's probably going to be the easiest for you to get into. There's no filing requirements. You don't have to, you can use it whether or not you have an employee. So that's one of the benefits. It does have smaller contribution limits, so you can contribute up to $6,000 per year, unless you're over 50, and you get to contribute up to $7,000 per year. So you get a little bit of a catch-up bonus there. Yeah. And really the main thing that you would need to decide before you start investing is whether you're going to do traditional IRA, and you might also have heard this term before, but a Roth IRA. And so the main difference between that is traditional, you can deduct any contributions on your income tax. So that's done pre-tax. So if I invest $1,000, I'm going to take $1,000 deduction on my tax return as long as I have the income requirements, right? The other side is the Roth IRA, and that's done after taxes. So this is a great way to save for the long term. So let's say I have $6,000 and I put that all in my Roth IRA, reach the limit, and I'm in a 25% tax bracket. I'm going to pay $1,500 this year. But let's say my $6,000 grew to $80,000 in 30, 40 years. I'm not paying 25% on that $80,000 because I've already paid my initial tax. So any of your earnings and any of your contributions at that point all become tax-free. So it's a little bit easier to manage when you look at it from a future standpoint. You know what your dollar amount's going to be. You're not going to pay tax. And it's important to remember that there's tons of resources online as well, right? So there's the kind of the major players when you talk about investing is, there's the Vanguard, there's Fidelity, there's TD Ameritrade, there's JP Morgan, and they all are online resources that you can go to and educate yourself as well. But my main advice is start now, start early, or start now, right? So the sooner you get your contributions going and you start saving for your retirement, that money, it's going to continue to grow at a faster rate. So definitely start early, start now.
The last thing I want to close with is just remembering that financial wealth isn't about earning more. It's about managing your money strategically by paying off debt and building an emergency fund, investing wisely, of course, and then reinvesting back into your business. And then you can create a more sustainable path and financial freedom for yourself. So hopefully these little nuggets gave you something to think about and are actually made you want to take action on it, because at the end of the day, you know how it is. I want you to dream big, set goals, take action. Thanks so much for hanging out. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. We would love to hear from you, especially if there are topics that you really want us to talk about next time around. I do love hearing from you, and it helps the right people find us as well. So again, take care, and I'll see you next week.